present a paper on intersecting perspectives of stakeholders and refugees on the settlement of Syrian refugees in Gatineau, Quebec. And I just want to remind the audience once again that you can use the chat to pose any questions that you might have. Take it away, Anyck.
Thank you very much. It's Université du Québec en Outaouais, not in Ottawa.
Okay.
No problem.
Thank you.
So, hello everyone. I'm very happy to have the opportunity to share with you some of the elements of the collaborative study I conducted on the resettlement of Syrian refugees in the city of Gatineau in Outaouais in Quebec. The main stakeholders involved in the resettlement of refugees in Gatineau participated in this research through an advisory committee. Gatineau is one of the 14 cities designated by the government of Quebec to welcome refugees. It therefore participated in the Syrian Refugee Resettlement Initiative launched by the federal government in November 2015. And in the 2 following years, it hosted more than 400 refugees, of whom around 2/3 were supported by the state and the other third by the community. The objectives of the study were to take stock of their resettlement, to shed light on the local factors that have contributed to, but also limited, the overall resilience of the refugees in the context of Gatineau, and to make recommendations to improve services. During the conduct of the survey, a small number of divergent views among the stakeholders emerge. And this is what I want to talk to you about today. I also, like Jill, made a slight change on for my presentation today. And for those who would like to know the result of the research report, it will be available very soon. My aim today was to provide an opportunity to the divergent point of views to express themselves more freely and to dialogue with each other. And I would like to point out that the document on which I am relying today is only a draft, and that I am awaiting feedback and validation from my co-authors. It is therefore under all reserve that I make this presentation by emphasizing very strongly that it is about my understanding as of today. So if some of my co-authors are here today, please feel free to jump in and to correct my interpretation or to add some information. The dissensus mainly concerns the right way to do resettlement. The right way in the sense of that which will promote the resilience and integration of refugees and the resilience of those accompanying them. They revolve around 3 questions: the place of volunteers in the infrastructure of resettlement services. Second, the municipal government support for monoethnic ethnocultural groups. And third, the approach for supporting the state-sponsored refugees. So let's start with the first dissensus. So volunteers outside the sponsorship group numbered in the hundreds during the first wave of Syrian refugees arriving in Gatineau. The service provider designated by the government to support refugees was literally overwhelmed by the amount of volunteers that were seeking to help. And seeing that the organization of volunteers was insufficient and wishing to better control their operations, Some volunteers then decided to regroup and work independently of service provider. For example, like the picture you can see on the slide, they distributed used bicycle, repaired used bicycle, tablet, and computers to family. And probably more importantly, they offered support for francization at home, focusing on daily life. One of the challenges that these independent volunteer groups faced was making their existence known to refugees. The reason was that the service provider would not agree to provide the contact details of the volunteers to the refugees or the other way around. Volunteers therefore had to rely on word of mouth between refugees to make themselves known. And this had the consequences of increasing their workload and of missing families that were not in their network. For the service provider, the groups of independent volunteers were not legitimate since they had no official status, and it could not be sure that the volunteers were trustworthy and had the human skills required. So for these reasons, and since the service provider had its own volunteer, it was undesirable from his point of view to formally inform the refugees of the existence of these group of independent volunteers. These tensions raise the question of how to establish the legitimacy of these initiatives without dampening their momentum as the that without that sorry that they clearly contribute to building the resilience of refugees, especially when a massive influx of refugees provoke a great mobilization. As support groups are often born spontaneously and have a fleeting life, it is unrealistic to require them to form a nonprofit organization before starting their activities. The second dissensus concerns the municipal government support for ethno-cultural groups that are monoethnic. As you know, municipal government, even in small and medium cities like Gatineau, are increasingly called upon to act on inclusion. And during the Syrian refugee resettlement initiatives, the city of Gatineau played an active role. In fact, it was more active than it ever had in welcoming refugees. The city was a member of the reception committee created, which brought together all the frontline actors involved in resettlement. It played a role of coordination and liaison between the stakeholders. Among other things, it oversaw public communication relating to the arrival of refugees' families in Gatineau and ensured that the message and information were sent to citizens. It also supported the frontline actors in their preparation and in their activities, and it organized complementary activities to theirs. For example, the city organized 2 days of collecting material donation, which helped channel the energy and enthusiasm of many citizens who wanted to contribute. Some citizens, however, wanted the city to be more proactive in organizing cultural rapprochement activities for Syrian refugees, and if not possible, to at least support the volunteers who were willing to do so, either financially or materially. But the city refused to support this type of activities because it asks for policy to finance only activities that are aimed at all ethnic group or bigger ethnic group, not just one group such as the Syrian, as it was the case here. The question of whether cities should support the funding of monoethnic cultural association is not new, and it also goes beyond the municipal framework. And at the heart of the hesitation is often the fear of discrimination and of favoring identity withdrawal. But this position can also be problematic when certain groups of immigrants have certain needs, and that activities dedicated to these needs could promote their resilience. The last dissensus that I want to touch on concerns the approach for supporting the state-sponsored refugees. The service provider designated by the government in Gatineau has a 40-year track record. And at the heart of its philosophy is the idea that integration is a two-way street. On the one hand, the host society must ensure that it offers newcomers an inclusive and caring environment in which they can access various resources and services. On the other hand, newcomers must take the reins of their integration and invest in their establishment by taking advantage of the multiple resources and services made available to them. Although there is 2 minutes,
yeah.
Although there is a broad consensus on this perspective in academia and practice, its operationalization may be subject to debate. For the service provider, it was important to show the refugees how to do things by themselves so that they could stand on their own feet at the end of the sponsorship period. Other actors felt, however, that the refugees had to fend for themselves too much, and several refugees shared this view and said that they felt left on their own too soon. One of the risks of accompanying refugees too closely is that they do not develop that independence that we want them to have. One of the risks of striving for independence early on is that refugee may then turn to other resources, family, friends, community, that may not be able to support them well. In other words, the risk is that refugee remains dependent, but of someone else, who is less competent at resettlement. So we must therefore find the right balance and the right strategy to develop autonomy. So I will stop here and I will be happy to answer your questions later on.
Thank you so much, Anyck. We'll go on to our next presentation now, and I want to bring on Frederic